Start your wellness journey at Whole Foods Market, where it's Jumpstart January through the 16th. Stock up on supplements with some of the year's biggest savings. Plus, save on air-chilled organic boneless skinless chicken breasts, organic Honeycrisp apples, organic large Hass avocados, and more. And since Whole Foods Market is the only certified organic national grocer, it's easy to make them your wellness destination. Jumpstart your January now at Whole Foods Market.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. It's questions day, Kieran, so the big question is, we all want to know, did you have a lovely time in that there Athens?
I had an absolutely fantastic time. There was sun, which you wouldn't have liked. There was fantastic food, a little bit of tear gas, a little bit of bifters. The most racist taxi driver I've ever met in my life. You know, it had everything. It had everything. We went to the Parthenon. Didn't go to the Fat Boy Slim gig after the match because that was 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. I think I'm a little bit too old for tapping me toes at that time of morning. And the original Olympic Stadium from 1896, I did a quick 10-yard sprint. I was just to see whether they've still got it. And yeah, it was a wonderful time. Thank you very much.
You could have, I believe they had hopscotch, didn't they, in the first Olympics? You could have done that. They had all sorts of bizarre sports. I don't know if they had hopscotch. They certainly had some bizarre sport. So the tear gas, Kieran, you said you went to eat. Was the tear gas part of the football experience, or was there this like Heston Blumenthal restaurant? You had cold octopus with a tear gas jus?
No, I mean at the end of the match, I ended up, because I'm a South London boy, I ended up in the Ike end of in the Ike seats rather than in the Brighton end, because it was the only way I could get a ticket for the Baroness. So I was in with the Greek fans who they knew I was Brighton. They were absolutely fine with me, and everybody was friendly. You know, you be respectful.
Of course.
I think under those circumstances, I didn't celebrate the goal or anything, but they knew who I was from accent and also the British teeth that I possess. But no trouble at the end. A few of them, shook hands and so on. That was all fine. A few of our lot, for reason, if I'd travelled, and let's face it, it is a long journey to get there. If I'd travelled all that distance, spent all of that money, I wouldn't have spent 90 minutes not watching the football, but instead making hand gestures to the people. And I just don't get this. And then at the end, some of our lot decided there was a partition between one of these perspex partitions, so they decided to start hammering on that to prove that just how hard they are. Some of the Ike fans got a bit arsey. So there was a few bits of 50-year-old men thinking that they're auditioning for Green Street.
Yeah, I know.
It's just embarrassing. But you're always going to get dickheads, and it's a perfect opposition.
Let's face it, Kieran. There's no point going abroad unless you're not going to remind the foreigners that they are foreign, Kieran. Really, even though in their own country technically they're not. Somebody made a very good point to me on Thursday night when I was doing comedy moaning about one day it'll be Palace out there. Out playing in Greece, and someone says, well, it's probably for the best because you'd get pissed and promise to give the Elgin marbles back. Which is exactly the sort of thing I would do.
Sensitive subject,
Kevin. Well, I, at the risk of annoying our producer who doesn't like us to be political about these things, give them back.
Yes.
They're quite capable of looking after themselves now. That was the excuse there was, the Greeks only leave them behind, wouldn't they? They'll go to a restaurant, get distracted and leave them somewhere. Anyway, on with the questions, Karen. But there's a bit of news beforehand, of course, and that is that the Everton appeal has come a little quicker than I think a lot of people were expecting. Do we know how the Everton appeal will work? Will they be saying, look, we did nothing wrong, we want all our 10 points back? Or will they be saying, look, yes, we acknowledge, as we did in the investigation, that there were anomalies, but this punishment is simply too high?
I think they will go down the latter route. In their initial submission, Everton said, based on our calculations, we believe that we are under the limit. Subsequently, they said, yeah, okay, we take on board a few of the things from the Premier League. So we accept that we believe we're only £7 million above the limit, and therefore the tariff is too high. I mean, there has been further communication between Andy Burnham, the mayor of Manchester, but also an Everton fan, and the Premier League. I think he's been going on. We'll try and get Andy on the show to articulate his views, because Sky decided to pull his interview, and which they're perfectly entitled to, of course. And the Premier League, I think, has fairly robustly defended its position. However, what the Premier League has done, and these are things which I wasn't aware of, apparently in 2020, there was an agreement, or certainly a discussion at Premier League, to say that the aim of sanctions would be a points deduction. And I can understand the logic of that. And they said, well, Everton at the time said, yeah, we're okay with that. If that's been minuted, I think that's good evidence one way or the other. And also somebody who I can only describe as the secret executive sent me an article dated the 8th of February 2013, where the Premier League says its clubs will be punished with a points deduction if they breach new spending controls. And there were comments from Richard Masters and so on. Now, again, part of the Everton defence will be that if you take a look at the Premier League handbook, the tariff is, I think, they would describe it as open-ended, i.e. the Commission can utilise whatever means it thinks it's appropriate. The opponents of it would say it's vague because there is no guidance as such. So I think what we will now be doing is that both sides will be hardening their position. They will be using evidence. I think Andy Burnham has asked for the full statement that Richard Masters gave to the Commission to be publicised in respect of the proposed tariff by the Premier League. Lots of people in what you might refer to as the Everton camp have said, well, if we take a look at the punishment, it's a 10-point deduction, and if you do your calculations based on the Premier League proposed tariff, it would be 6 points plus 1 point for every 5 million above the allowable limit, and that would come to 10 points as well. This is quite a spectacular coincidence. Is this evidence that the Premier League were putting pressure on the Commission? The Premier League will also say, well, actually, we'd asked for a 12-point deduction, independent of this as well. So there's lots of finger pointing. I think the most important thing is that the appeal is held very, very quickly because, and my personal view is that regardless of whether it's a 10-point deduction or not, Everton are a good enough team to avoid relegation. I don't know whether you saw the match last night, but they were clearly far better than Forest, for example. But that's a separate issue. Clubs are working out their January transfer budgets, and I think having a degree of certainty and clarity is beneficial from a sporting point of view. Do I expect the decision to be made by the end of this month? No. But the longer it drags on, the worse it becomes, I think, for not just things such as transfer strategy, but individual match strategy. We've said this before. Sometimes you go into a match saying, well, if we nick a point, we're happy. Whereas other matches, we need to win this one, lads. And having an uncertain 10-point deduction with regards to Everton certainly has an impact upon those operational decisions.
Yeah, we're recording this on Sunday morning, so I'm very much in if we nick a point, it will be cartwheel time. That'll get me through to Christmas, that point today. A couple of things, Kieran. First of all, I hope we're keeping our secret executive in more salubrious circumstances than we keep the rest of our secret informers, who are somewhere in a shed on a beach in Sussex, I understand, Kieran. Can you remind people who maybe didn't listen to the last couple of pods why that Sky interview with Andy Burnham was pulled, and also why, notwithstanding he's an Everton fan, why is the Mayor of Manchester getting so exercised about what's happened to Everton. Is this on a personal basis, or because it has raised a few eyebrows that Andy Burnham is kind of going into battle for a team in a city that most people in Manchester don't get along with football-wise?
Yeah, I think if we answer that second question first, he has said, I am communicating on a personal capacity.
Right. Okay.
And that's fine, but he's then publicised it on his Twitter account, which, it doesn't say Andy Burnham, Mayor of Manchester. It does say Andy Burnham, but clearly he also posts things in relation to his position as Mayor of Manchester. Yeah, I'm a big Andy Burnham fan. I was very impressed with him back in the day when he was one stage running to be the leader of the Labour Party and so on. And as you know, I'm not party political, but he seems to be an intelligent guy capable of making intelligent decisions, which you can't say about everybody in politics. So that's the second issue. And I've now forgotten your first question because I'm an old man and I've got the memory of a goldfish. You can just repeat that first one.
Well, it's only because I wrote it down that I can remember what it was, Kieran. Has it occurred to me as otherwise I'd be in the same boat? Why was that interview with Sky pulled?
Well, the official reason was that it was Manchester United versus Everton. It's a big match. There were lots of other people to interview, and they just felt that it was a lower priority topic to cover, or lower priority person. The unofficial view is that the Premier League is in the position in which it's allocating the domestic TV rights from 2024 onwards. And therefore, Sky, as one of the potential bidders, doesn't want to do anything to upset the Premier League. And that's a cynical view. That's certainly a view which has been expressed to me by some senior people. Other people of other views. Sky will say, we are completely independent, and we assume that the Premier League will give the TV rights to the biggest bidders, and we're going to put in a very competitive bid. So the Premier League can be a little bit hissy at times. Certainly in my own experience of when they decided to use the Institute of Economic Affairs as their attack dog for anybody who's sort of connected with the fan-led review. I did find that a bit strange, to put it mildly.
Well, talk of the fan-led review, Kieran, brings me to my second point, because we have questions about FFP today and about the independent regulator. But there have been journalists this week in a desperate attempt to discredit the fan-led review in every possible way they can, are using the Everton situation to do just that by pointing out that the only Premier League person who really took part in the Tracy Crouch fan-led review was the person who was the CEO of Everton at the time they were supposedly making these financial errors or misdemeanors or whatever. So that seems to me an odd stick to beat the regulator with, but it's an indicator of how desperate some of the newspapers, and we know which ones they are to avoid any notion of an independent regulator in football.
Yeah, there's very much a policy of deny, delay, discredit, and deflect being employed by the Premier League. I think the somewhat the insidious thing that I find is that why are we not seeing the big six clubs come forward and express the views? Because what they're doing instead is they're using the likes of Steve Parish and Paul Barber and the chief executives of the smaller clubs deliberately, because they know that if they used somebody from Manchester United or Liverpool, people go, hold on, you were in favour of effectively abandoning the rest of football by taking control of it under Project Big Picture and the Super League. So I just find the coordinated approach disappointing, and also the Premier League is not going to be affected by the white paper. I can't understand. The only issue that they've got with it is that they know that if it does come in, they will have to distribute more money to the EFL to spread the money around a little bit more generously. But it's an ever growing pie. slicing the pie and giving a little bit more to the EFL isn't actually going to be a significant financial hit for Premier League clubs. I just can't understand the extent of the opposition. I mean, the only thing is that if you don't have an independent regulator, then the offer, which is presently on the table from the Premier League, would simply be withdrawn. And then they'd use bully boy tactics as they've done in the past. The reason why the Elite Player Performance Plan was approved by the clubs in the EFL is that the Premier League threatened to take away solidarity payments unless the EFL clubs caved in. And they like that power. They like the ability to bully the other elements of football into what's best for 20 clubs, which I don't, and I'm not saying this because Brighton are in the Premier League. I'd have said the same when we were in the EFL, to which no doubt we will return one day, of course.
Yeah, fingers crossed, Kieran. Yeah, I nearly missed that opportunity then. I don't want to dwell on this, Kieran, because we have some really good questions to get to, but also a couple of the, I suppose you would describe them as opposition journalists, hinting this week that FIFA will not be happy if the independent regulator were to take over, because FIFA wants the FAs of each country to be running football, and clearly the independent regulator will be taking over the FA's job, which is not. It's simply, again, it's a willful misunderstanding of what the role of the independent regulator will be doing.
Yeah, it's spectacular ignorance, and as I say, deny, deflect, discredit. The independent regulator will have nothing to do with the running of the England football team.
Of course,
we already have government interference in football in the sense that you can't take a pint of beer onto the terraces or into your seat. That is government legislation impacting upon football. Now, it happens to be legislation which I'm quite happy to agree with, because, again, having been to a couple of European matches and seen the dickhead's day out response to scoring a goal, I don't particularly want to get covered in cheap lager
No.
when you score. So it's it's a bit juvenile. There is an adult debate to be had, and it's not taking place because we live in a world in which cheap headlines and churlish remarks seem to be the order of the day.
Well, I'm going to add to the adult debate, Kieran, by speculating as to where Prince William gets the time to do all his FA work, when he's clearly got other things to do at the moment. He's too busy reviewing books to do all those committees he has to sit on in the FA. First question, Kieran, is one on FFP, and it comes from Andrew Carruthers. And it's an indication, Kieran, that no matter how much we talk about FFP, we never get to the bottom of it, because there's always another question. And Andrew Carruthers' question is, in general, what classes as income in terms of FFP? But more specifically, says Andrew, is interest earned on money in the bank classed as income? If so, what would stop PIF loaning Newcastle £2 billion interest-free to sit in an account collecting interest and boosting their spending power?
Right, Andrew. The start point for the PSR calculations is the profit before tax in the audited accounts of the club, or even the unaudited accounts of the club. And then you make appropriate adjustments for what we describe as virtue spending, infrastructure, women's team, academy, community schemes, and so on. And then there are specific adjustments in respect of COVID, because we're still in a post-COVID environment, and so on. So theoretically, interest earned would be included in those calculations. And if we take a look at the position of Chelsea Football Club, Chelsea borrowed around about £1.5 billion from some Russian bloke whose name I've forgotten. But that money could have been put into the bank. Instead, it was used to sign players. Chelsea lost an awful lot of money under Abramovich. So could PIF lend the money interest-free and then Newcastle United put it into a high interest-bearing account? The simple answer is yes. What would the response to that be? As we have seen, recently there are monthly meetings of chief executives of Premier League clubs, and they would simply say, we're going to introduce a new rule, interest earned would be excluded. So it would be the classic whack-a-mole approach taken. as new schemes are derived, there is the opportunity for other clubs in the Premier League to effectively veto them. And remember, we had that decision taken last week with regards to related party transactions, which went against the Premier League. So it would need 7 clubs to vote against being able to put billions of pounds into a bank account to circumvent FFP. I don't think that there are 7 teams that would vote against it based on the present makeup of the Premier League. But never say never.
You're forgetting quite a lot today, Kieran. Are you sure some of that octopus you had ceviche in Athens wasn't marinated in Retsina beforehand? It's most unlike you, Kieran.
Start your wellness journey at Whole Foods Market, where it's Jumpstart January through the 16th. Stock up on supplements with some of the year's biggest savings. Plus, save on air-chilled organic boneless skinless chicken breasts, organic Honeycrisp apples, organic large Hass avocados, and more. And since Whole Foods Market is the only certified organic national grocer, it's easy to make them your wellness destination. Jumpstart your January now at Whole Foods Market.
Our next question, Kieran, comes from Barclay Webster. And producer guy has discouraged. What a great name! Producer guy has discouraged me from commenting on people's names because you don't know how sensitive they are. But Barclay Webster, I can't let that one go by. He may have done. Somebody did, but it's Barclay Webster. Surely was if he wasn't a mate of Fred Astaire, you can't imagine. Barclay Webster's a tap dancer from the 30s, isn't he? A debonair, suave. Apologies, Barclay, if you're neither of those things. But he has a good question, Barclay. And Barclay says, if and when the proposals in the government's white paper on regulation become a reality, do we know where they would apply in the UK? Would some of it only apply in England due to relevant areas being devolved to the administrations in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland? And if the proposals are mainly focused on England, how would this work for Welsh clubs playing in the Premier League and the EFL, which is a subject we'll be coming back to? Brackets, on a similar note, how would Berwick Rangers be affected, given they are based in England but play in the Scottish Lowland League, close brackets? So this is essentially, it's a very interesting question. Are we only talking about the English pyramid here, Kieran? And are we talking about the whole pyramid? Or are we talking about the Premier League and the EFL only?
Right. If we take a look at the white paper and the proposals, it covers the first 5 tiers of the English game. So that would be the Premier League, Championship, League One and League Two, and the National League. It wouldn't apply to National League North or National League South or anything below that, and it wouldn't apply to the principalities, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and so on. So it is actually quite a narrow focus. Certainly, some commentators have said, is there a case for expanding the regulator's influence in terms of things such as the licence and going below the National League? But that decision has been made. I think they feel that the compliance costs for clubs going further down the pyramid would be quite onerous, and some of the issues that we see wouldn't necessarily apply. Although we were talking about Nuneaton Borough in Thursday's show, and there's things happening there which are making me increasingly twitchy with regards to where the ownership is going at that particular club. So every club is worth preserving, is my view, but that's a view in a personal capacity, of course. As far as the Welsh clubs playing in the Premier League and the EFL and Berwick Rangers, because they are playing in the Premier League or in the EFL, they would be therefore under the scrutiny of the regulator. Because otherwise it wouldn't be fair. If we're going to have a set of financial rules being applied, and for want of a better phrase, the equivalent of Ofsted being able to go in and look at a club's books, it would be pretty cheesed off if Chester, it applied to them if they were in the National League, but and it didn't apply to Wrexham, or it applied to Bristol City and not to Cardiff City. So in order to have consistency as part of the deal of playing in the Premier League or the EFL, you have to comply with its regulatory bodies, which would include the regulator. set by the government.
You mentioned Nuneaton Borough there, Kieran. We discussed it in our last news pod, but the news had only just broken as we went to air. That makes us sound much more glamorous and grown up than we actually are. Before we started recording, essentially. So, are there any updates on that Nuneaton Borough story in the last couple of days you can share?
Well, as you know, Company's House is my friend,
Indeed,
and the ping doesn't ding every day in terms of my little bell I've got on my phone, but on Friday it started pinging an awful lot in respect of the reason why I'm looking out the window somewhat circumspectly at present is that the Baroness has being very community minded, is presently filling the community gritter. Because we live in the middle of nowhere, and as tends to be the case, we live in a little estate. Only 4 people have joined her to help fill the community gritter, because it has been icy recently, and the council don't come down our road, and it's piddling down with rain, and she's just walked past the window with the shovel, and is carrying a sack of grit, and she's just given me a few hand signals, which might indicate that I'm not in the good books at present. But back to Nuneaton Borough. The club appeared to have been taken over by 3 or 4 individuals in a company called DA Capital earlier in the week, which we referenced on Thursday's show. But then that seemed to unravel itself on Friday, and I'm trying to get a little bit closer to the bottom of this. So we're not sure who owns the club, what are the implications in terms of where the club's going to be playing, its fixtures, and so on. So I'll try and do a bit more ferreting if I'm still alive by the time of the recording of the Thursday show.
I believe in your part of the world, Kieran, leftover couscous makes a handy substitute for gritting. More responsible as well. I like the fact the council doesn't come down your street, which is exactly what happened for the first 12 years of your life in Bermondsey, but for very different reasons. The council didn't come down your street in those days. And also, that's a great expression as well. I can imagine many middle-aged men going to the GP saying, what's exactly the problem? Well, I can't really put my finger on it, Doc, but all I can say is the ping doesn't ding every day anymore. Oh, my God. Daniel Powell has a question, and at the moment, our listeners, along with many other people in football, seem to be obsessed with how much the Glazers are going to make out of selling Manchester United. And Daniel Powell has this question. In terms of the Glazer family selling their stake in Manchester United, what proportion of the price would they receive? For example, if a £5 billion offer is accepted for the club, would they only receive 69% of that £5 billion because 31% of the club has been floated on the New York Stock Exchange?
Yes, the reason why there is a lack of white smoke coming from Old Trafford is exactly with what Daniel is referring to. We don't know who is going to be selling the shares to Sir Jim Ratcliffe. I think originally the intention was for the Glazer family only to be in a position to sell shares to him. And Manchester United being traded in New York has some benefits in the sense that the club's trying to reposition itself as an entertainment stroke tech company rather than a sports vehicle, and therefore increase its value. And it's more persuasive, I think, if it's registered in New York. The downside of being registered in New York is we know America is a very litigious society. And despite, if you go to Manchester United's own constitution, it actually says that the Glazer family may make decisions which is in their best interest and is not in the best interest of shareholders as a whole. They actually acknowledge that might be the case, but some of these shareholders who own significant number of shares have said, we ain't happy with these proposals and we will sue unless we are also given the opportunity to sell some of our shares. So what I suspect will be the case is that Sir Jim will buy 25% of the company, and that will be perhaps in the ratio of 69 to 31 in terms of who's allowed to sell shares to him. But we'll have to wait and see. It has gone ridiculously quiet though, which there's no reason for that to be the case. Deals, when you've got accountants and lawyers and bankers, working 24 hours a day and charging their clients 28 hours a day for the work that they're doing, there's no reason why a deal can't be hammered out. I can't make out why there is this delay. I don't think it's in the best interests of certainly of Manchester United fans, because if shares are sold, but also shares are issued, then Manchester United could have a more competitive budget in January. One of the reasons why Manchester United's been restricted to having some loan signings, as well as signing some, should we say, players that haven't necessarily delivered in line with expectations, is because you're only allowed to lose £15 million under the FFP rules, and then you can top that up with a further 90 million in terms of injections from the owners. And of course, the Glazers famously have only taken money out of Manchester United and never put any money in.
This takeover was supposed to be done and dusted in a week, if you remember, Kieran. One round of bids, immediate sale afterwards, and here we are many, many months later. Kieran, you often talk about a question being a can of worms. This next question is opening a can of worms whilst negotiating a minefield and holding up a metal golf club during a thunder and lightning storm. It comes from Derek Shea. I don't think we've got time to answer it in depth, but it comes from Derek Shea, and it's a question we have been asked before, and it's a question that takes a lot of answering. Basically, Derek says, why are Welsh teams allowed in the English leagues but not Scottish teams? And the answer is historical initially, Kieran, isn't it?
Yes. And what's this got to do with football finance? I think this is a much broader question and issue. But Derek, my response would be is that if we go back to the 19th century, we go to sort of the beginnings of the professionalism of football. We had the English FA setting up a professional competition, and we also had the Scottish Football Association setting up professional football in Scotland as well, with professional leagues and competitive leagues, and that wasn't the case in Wales. So therefore, the big cities in Wales, the likes of Swansea and Cardiff and so on, they signed an agreement, and we're going back 100 years or so, with the English FA, which would allow Welsh clubs to play in England. Now, there was no such contract signed between England and Scotland. It's fair to say the English and Scotland weren't necessarily the best of pals. And also that there was that sense of, we know from historically whenever Scotland had beaten England, and you and I are old enough to remember the home internationals from the 1970s and so on, some of the post-match celebrations were exuberant from Scottish fans. So it's partly due to the lack of having a professional league in Wales, which would have allowed the likes of Swansea and Cardiff to compete. The SPFL or the equivalent of the SPFL, has been professional for many leagues, and it's more of a historical anomaly as much as anything else. And of course we always bring up, because it's FA Cup third round draw, which I still get excited about. I'm sure you do too. We always go back to 1926-27 when Cardiff City famously became the only club to take the FA Cup out of England.
Yeah, it is a very long. It is financial, Kieran. In a way, I think every question is financial and political. Really, the finances come into the fact that the Welsh league now would rather see the clubs playing in Wales for the benefit of their own finances, and there are reasons why the Welsh clubs playing in England choose to remain within the pyramid. And we have seen the recent history of Newport County, which we haven't got time to go into, would indicate how upset the Welsh FA can be with those clubs who still persist in playing in England. It essentially, in the 50s, 60s and 70s, FIFA started to get arsey with Welsh football because they were wondering why Wales had a football team and a vote on the FIFA Council at the time, but had no league, which is why the Welsh Football League came into being. And I'm sure there were people who will correct that, but that's essentially. But you're right; it's essentially a historical anomaly. For back in the day, there was no Welsh league for those clubs to take part in. But the politics of Anglo-Welsh football are very sensitive down there, and understandably so. And if anybody from any of those Welsh clubs or from the Welsh FA would like to get in touch, we'll happily discuss it. Now, our next question, Kieran, comes from L. Robert. And in brackets, producer guy has put no first name, just the initial PG. Because obviously, I think producer guy worries that we would go, what's the matter with producer? What's he done? He's obviously just decided not to put the whole name down. But producer guy gets his excuses in first, which is he's a natural politician. We've not even asked him a question yet, and he gets his answer in before that. So, L. Robert, we don't know. It could be Laurent Robert. We don't know. Could be Larry
Great
Robert. We don't know. Larry Robert, don't remember him. But L. Robert, his question is, if football ever does move on from fixed contracts, could clubs just substitute non-compete clauses? So maybe players could have the right to leave their contracts, but clubs could then attach a list of employers that they are banned from joining for a period of time after termination of the contract, which traditionally, for example, if you left the hairdressers, you weren't allowed to work for another hairdressers within a 3-mile radius. And other professions used to indicate had similar things in the 70s and 80s, which is sort of no legal basis, but it was just, it was to stop hairdressers taking their clients with them to another salon, basically. So it's an interesting alternative, Kieran, isn't it?
Yes, and it is certainly common in other industries as well. What Derek is, what L is referring to is gardening leave, because we certainly see that in the world of finance. If you've got senior bankers, I've seen it in law firms as well, where especially if you've got a big client portfolio, you can't join a competing company for a period of 12 months. Also, if we take a look at football management, Mauricio Pochettino, I think, wasn't able to join another English Premier League club when Spurs sacked him as part of his settlements. And we do see references to this being made. In respect of the abolition of fixed-term contracts, i.e., a footballer signs a 4 or 5 year deal, and the only way he can leave or she can leave is if somebody pays compensation. Everything's up there for negotiation. I don't think there's any desire for that, though, because we know that some clubs are selling clubs, and this would actually potentially benefit the bigger clubs. Because if I had a promising, if you got promising 18, 19-year-old, and you say, right, we're going to give you a pay rise, but under the terms of this new deal, you're not allowed to join Manchester United, Liverpool, Chelsea, Manchester City, and so on. You just refuse to take it, and because you're not on a fixed term contract, you can actually walk away for nothing. So I'm not sure who would be the beneficiaries of this. The players. What happens if they get an injury? They don't get the protection of having a fixed term contract. The current employer doesn't get the benefit of developing talent with a view to being able to move that talent on and have that as part of a sale model. You look at the success of Brentford. They've been part of the reason why they're in the Premier League was when they were in the Championship, they were absolutely brilliant at spotting underrated talent, and they used the sale proceeds of those players to improve the quality of their squad and so on. So, could it happen? Yes, it's a possibility. Do I see it happening? No, because I just don't see where the desire is coming from. Certainly not necessarily from players. I can't see the benefit from clubs. Could FIFA decide it unilaterally with Gianni Infantino in charge? Who knows? But I think there would be a lot of pushback. And we've seen, in fact, this week, it's probably a story we'll actually cover on Thursday, that agents have had a partial victory with regards to the attempt by Infantino to limit agents' commissions, because he wants to he wants for them to be the pantomime villain in football, based on nothing apart from the fact that it's populist nonsense, which gets you a long way these days, of course.
Yeah. We're waiting till Thursday because we're still waiting for Infantino's response, which will be nonsense, I imagine. But we'll give it a few days to absorb the full nonsense of his nonsensical answer. I won't name the person concerned, Kieran, but I managed to upset a once very high profile Premier League manager who I got on quite well with at the time. Because I bumped into him after somewhere. I said, "Blimey, you're coining it in for that gardening leave, aren't you?" And he went, "No, that ended 2 years ago. I've just not been offered a job anywhere else." And oh, okay. Sorry about that. Slightly awkward moment, which is why I say I once got on very well with him. Dave Asher. I'm very good at putting my foot in things, Kieran. Which is why that Doctor Who episode last night terrified me. Doctor Who growing a giant foot. Goodness. Dave Asher is Lincoln City, and I never understood if it's Grantham Town or Grantham Town. So please, the people of Grantham or Grantham, correct me on that. But Dave is a Lincoln City fan and a town of, let's go for Grantham Town. And Dave says, if I were to win or inherit a large sum of money, could I set up an investment trust to run Lincoln City and deposit, say, £15 million and use 10% of the dividend to invest and expand the fund and use the remaining dividends to fund Grantham Town to allow sustainable income streams? The reason I like this question so much, Kieran, is I love a question where people speculate about what they would do if they win a lot of money, which is basically what most football fans do. First thing I would do, of course, is to buy Crystal Palace and change the kit back to claret and blue. And then I would try and explain to Ali why I'd spent all that money I'd won on buying Crystal Palace just to change the kit.
Yes. Well, Dave, we're not qualified financial advisors, myself or Kevin, so we have to be cautious here before we answer this question, just in case you go, well, yeah, it was Maguire and Day that persuaded me to do it, and now I'm skint again.
Don't bring me into this. I'm the last person anybody.
There's absolutely nothing to stop you funding a football club or a series of football clubs as you see fit. I don't think there'd be any conflict of interest given where the two clubs are. I've got to be honest, I'm not sure how far £15 million will get you. I mean, Lincoln City themselves received some further investment this week, and also what the terms and conditions would be with regards to decision making. So could you do it as a quasi gift? Certainly you could. Many people do that. And in terms of giving the residual to Grantham Town, yes, absolutely. It's entirely down to you. Ultimately, it's your money, it's your decision. So yeah, it's if you win the lottery, don't stick it in a football club. It's really not a sensible thing to do.
Another strong name coming up, Kieran. I mean, we've had Barclay Webster, the 1930s tap dancer. Now we've got a 1970s policeman. Is just 2 days away from retirement. So please God, let nothing happen to him. This question comes from Carter Gaunt. What a great name that is, Carter Gaunt. Carter says, I'm currently in the midst of a finance research project based on how FC Barcelona have used financial methods to manage their debt crisis. In brackets says, I'm still struggling for a title for the project. I could think of a lot of them, but I don't think they'd be usable properly. My question for Kieran is, when you analyse the financial performance of FC Barcelona, do you look at the accounts for the whole club, including football, basketball, handball, etc., or just the first team finances?
Right, and Carter, this is a very fair question, because Barcelona is a sporting club which is clearly dominated here by football, but it has a number of other sporting interests as well. What I would do here personally is, as much as possible, I would use the football figures, and this is prepared in what's referred to as a segmental report. So it is possible to strip out, I think, as far as Barcelona is concerned, the wages, the revenue from ticket sales, and so on, between football and the other sports. But you can't do it for everything, because you do have some shared resources, such as your infrastructure resources, stadium. If you're borrowing money, is the money you borrowed, especially from a bank, can that all of that be allocated to the football club? Can some of it be allocated to the football club? And then it becomes quite arbitrary. So as far as I can, I use the segmental analysis to look at the revenue generated by Barcelona, because otherwise I don't think, one of the things we always do is we benchmark against other clubs. Now, Manchester City doesn't have a basketball club, it doesn't have a handball club, it doesn't do this, that, and the other. It just does football. So you want to compare as best you can revenue and wages and some of the key metrics to other clubs in your industry. You can't do that with regards to all of the financial data. So I do it as far as I can. With regards to just first team finances, that's pretty tricky, stroke impossible for the vast majority of clubs. Or that's actually a question we're coming back to a little bit later. First of all, defining first team. Is it the list of players that's given to La Liga? Does it therefore include the coach? Does it include the first team physio? Can you see we've actually got some fairly arbitrary decisions to be made, and defining terms is a spectacularly dull activity as somebody that sort of trawls through documents as a hobby. But it can lead to huge inconsistencies when you've got different definitions of what we mean by first team or just football itself.
Yeah. So Barcelona couldn't, for example, Kieran, invest in the women's basketball team, the women's handball team, or the academy for basketball and handball, and then try and offset that against FFP for the football team.
That's correct. Though here we go into that murky area as what happens if you've got training facilities which are shared by the first team of the football team, but also the basketball team, and so on. And this is an issue not just with multi-sport organisations, but also multi-club organisations. If you're looking at the City Football Group, for example, if you've got a HR department, if you've got a finance department, if you've got a legal department, they might say, well, we've got 8 football clubs, so let's split it evenly between 8 clubs. Some people go, hold on, we're sure Manchester City are possibly a little bit more occupied with legal issues than Melbourne City or New York City. So is that necessarily fair? And that gives scope for shenanigans. And I'm not making any accusations with regards to Manchester City that they are guilty of any shenanigans, but certainly as it sounds really good. As somebody that used to teach creative accounting, this is one of the areas that I'd always be demonstrating to students.
I genuinely thought you were about to say, as somebody who used to teach shenanigans. But,
well,
there again, I think creative accounting. Yeah. As you so cleverly predicted, Kieran, our penultimate question is about that similar issue, and it comes from Tom Elson. And Tom Elson says, "I'm a Burton fan, and I spent time recently looking at our latest accounts. What have you done to people, Kieran? Seriously."
I'm so sorry.
Just
I'm so sorry.
Normal, nice people. And Tom says the wage bill was just over £4 million. Would this be the entire wage bill for the business as a whole, or just the budget relating to the first team and staff? If it's the former, what percentage of the overall budget is likely to be related to the non-playing side?
Right, Tom. The wage bill does relate to everybody employed by the football club. Now, the vast majority of football clubs give no further granular detail as to the breakdown. However, there are a couple of exceptions. First of all, we have Cardiff City, and hats off to Cardiff. They very kindly do break down their costs between what they call football staff and non-football staff. And for Cardiff, again, it will depend upon where they are in terms of the football pyramid. For Cardiff, it varied between 76 to 88% of the total wage bill was allocated to football employees. As they ceased to have parachute payments, the percentage tended to decrease. So clubs in the Premier League have a much higher proportion of their total wage bill allocated to football because you're signing players who are on £15 million a year contracts, and that doesn't matter. That's an awful lot of staff who are on bog standard wages. Whereas if you're in League One, you might be on 100, 200 grand a year, and you might only be on a factor of 8 as opposed to 80 or 800 times the wages of some of your colleagues ultimately at the same employer. The other club where I pick up this data from is Rangers. And for Rangers, they give the first team wages as a proportion of total revenue. And then I can triangulate that to say, well, how does it work out as a proportion of the total wage bill? So for Rangers, the first team wage bill was 2/3. It was 67% of the total wage bill. So what I do is people say, how do I work? I often put out data showing the average wage level of individual clubs. How much do I expect a first team to? I use a standard formula for that, sort of based on what I've picked up from looking at Rangers and Cardiff and those clubs to form the basis. Because ultimately, I don't know. It is guesswork, and I'd always use that. But because it's a consistent formula that I use, I think it shows sort of the relative benefits of working at Club A as opposed to Club B and so on. And there are idiosyncrasies and there are inconsistencies simply because you might have at one club, you've got 100 people who are being employed by the football club itself, and at another club, those people would be outsourced because you've got a third party employing them, for things like stewarding and security and other bits and pieces.
I'm not good with numbers, Kieran, but proportions and percentages were my nemesis. They literally Charlie Brown's teacher, just a scrambled mess of numbers. Talking of Rangers, Kieran, brings us nicely to our last question, which is a Scottish-based question, and it comes from Anton Gallagher. And I think this is a very interesting question, actually, Kieran, and I'm fairly certain we haven't discussed this before. But Anton Gallagher says, Hampden Park has long been criticised up here as a poorly designed stadium for watching football. Although it holds great historical significance, I wonder if it's commercially viable. And what about other national stadiums? Are these shrewd investments or expensive monuments? Was that the sound of a bucket full of grit being thrown at the window there, Kieran?
Yes, the Baroness's.
It sounded like somebody's trying to get your attention.
Yes. I think part of that phrase was, when are you coming out to help me? There was a word in there which I've not, which was included in that comment. But I think
tell her you're with Uncle Kevin. She likes Uncle Kevin. Tell her
she's your biggest fan. She says, you are my therapist. You are my master of chuckles twice a week. So no, I'm absolutely delighted, and so she. Every time we're on the show. So with regards to this, the stadiums are probably not making money. If we take a look at Wembley Stadium, the total cost was £798 million. How often is it used during the year? If we take a look at the Principality Stadium, also known as the Millennium Stadium, which was open, that cost £121 million. People go, well, why did Wembley cost 7 times as much as Cardiff? I know, costs are a bit more expensive in London, but I think it's just a spectacular lack of control when it came to Wembley. And then, of course, we've got the Olympic Stadium, which also costs an absolute fortune, and that certainly is, from a financial point of view, has been a disaster for the UK, and spectacularly good for for West Ham United. As far as Wembley is concerned, and this might be of interest to Everton fans, the Football Association borrowed money and stuck £74 million worth of interest costs onto the cost of Wembley Stadium. So if they can do it, why are Everton unable to do it for some of the period? I appreciate that's down to sort of technical rules and so on. They don't make money by themselves. To be fair to the FA, it is now making a profit, but that's probably more to do with broadcasting rights than Wembley Stadium itself. And they're very, very coy, the FA, in terms of the profitability of Wembley. They do rent out the facilities for hospitality, for conferences and so on. So it is earning money 5 days a week. But there are, from an accountant's point of view, I don't think it's particularly successful. But there will be smoke screens and so on. And there also, of course, it was subsidised because it was given grants by DCMS, Sport England, the London Development Association. And people might be saying, well, why is a rich, very wealthy body such as the English FA piling money into a flagship stadium when grassroots football is being or feels so abandoned? That's a separate topic.
Yes, it is, and we're about to finish the pod, Kieran, so let's not go there because the pod will be another hour longer. Hampden Park is slightly different though, Kieran, or slightly quirkier, if you like, in that it does have regular football played on it by a club, doesn't it?
It does. It doesn't really pay the rent as such because clearly the attendances are so low. Again, I think that's more to do with the historical anomaly than anything else. Wembley is great for conferencing. Wembley is a decent stadium in which to watch football and other things. There's a separate debate as to does the National Stadium have to be the London Stadium?
Yes, yes, even I agree with that. To be honest, it shouldn't be. It should be more accessible than it is, Kieran. Or we should be playing England games at other towns and cities, basically. If anybody from Queen's Park, by the way, is listening to this, I've always been interested in discussing how your finances work. So if you'd like to come on and have a general chit chat, it'd be nice occasionally to talk to somebody from a club that's not in any trouble. We're just interested in them. So if anybody from Queen's Park wants to have a chat, please get in touch with Producer Guy and we'll have you on. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod as well, that would be very kind of you. It'd get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes. I think we've got a Christmas one coming up, I guess, or New Year's one. You can do all that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. As we've been mentioning, Kieran and I are going to be in Hastings on December the 13th for an event with East Sussex Libraries. It's sold out now, unfortunately, but there is a waiting list, which if you wish to put your name on that waiting list in case somebody pulls out because it's a bit cold and no one's gritted the streets of Hastings like the community-minded Baroness has done, you can do that by going to the link in the show notes below and registering to go onto the waiting list. And if you'd like to buy our book or one of our other books or get yourself a Price of Football t-shirt, you can find details on that website, priceoffootball.com. We'll be back on Thursday with our regular news pod, where the first story may be that Kieran has been hit over the head with a gritting shovel. But in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran. Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thank you everybody for all the support for the show, for all the different means, and we're genuinely. Kevin and I are both fans. I fell in love with reading due to being able to go to a library on a weekly basis. So it's a chance for us to put something back. We're absolutely delighted to be asked to do so. There's various other ways you can support the show, one of which is to give us a review by going onto your app. Also, if you want to review the book on Amazon, a few people have said some nice words about it. That always helps us in terms of the algorithms there. It doesn't matter, by all accounts, what you say as far as the review is concerned. So you could even say you would rather have the show presented by Jake Burns of Stiff Little Fingers, as I was listening to Wasted Life this morning, and Andreas, the racist taxi driver from Athens, who I think it's fair to say is a man that doesn't like being quiet.
That's a sitcom sketch there, isn't it, Kieran? Jake Burns and Andreas. Hello, Smudge. All right, bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.